I'll say thanks. So welcome everyone to the first of three Transit Caucus briefings. As a reminder, the Transit Caucus is a bipartisan, bicameral group of legislators who are interested in transit issues and in educating ourselves as much as possible at transit issues and advocating for policies and budget decisions that support a robust and equitable transit system in our state, and all the good economic benefits that come along with that. So we do a number of things to support transit and transit policy, but one of the things that we do is educate ourselves and each other about it. And part of the way we do that is with briefings during the legislative session. We have three briefings this year. We sort of built a tradition of these particular three. We have the Department of Legislative Services give us Transit 101, which is what we're doing today. And then we hear from MDOT and MTA and WMATA, and then also the business and advocacy groups that support funding in both the Baltimore region and the DC region. So those are coming up. You should have details of those in an email tomorrow. So keep an eye out for them. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Sam Quist from the Department of Legislative Services. He'll be followed by Kelly Norton from Department of Legislative Services. And then after they're done with their presentation, we'll take questions. And Sam, I think you should be able to share a screen if you want to.
Yes, let me just pull up my slides and we can get started. All right, you should all be able to see the slideshow. So yes, I'm going to start out with a little bit of just a general 101 about the TTF, and then we'll move on to some more specifics about MTA, and then Kelly will go into some specifics about WMATA. So as a refresher, the Transportation Trust Fund is the special fund that provides the funding for the Maryland Department of Transportation. Revenues retained in the TTF cover the MDOT operating budget, the debt service costs on bonds issued by MDOT, as well as supporting the capital budget, along with other non-TTF capital funding sources. And then there are a small portion of TTF revenues that are allocated to other state agencies for miscellaneous purposes. So this first slide is showing the revenue sources for the TTF over the 6-year financial forecast period from fiscal 26 to 2031. So every January, MDOT puts out a financial forecast where they provide revenue and expenditure projections for the upcoming 6-year period. This current forecast shows that the largest funding source is federal capital program support at about 19%. And then the largest state source tax and fee revenues are the titling tax, motor fuel tax, and vehicle registration fees. An interesting development in this year's forecast is that due to projected motor fuel tax declines, as well as the increases in titling tax revenues, part of which were enacted as part of revenue increases last session, the titling tax actually is projected to surpass the motor fuel tax as the largest state-sourced revenue for the TTF going forward. MDOT also issues 15-year consolidated transportation bonds to support the capital program. Over the 6-year forecast, bonds are projected to be about 7% of TTF revenues. The next slide provides an overview of the Transportation Trust Fund revenue increases that were enacted in the 2024 and 2025 session. In total, these are projected to increase revenues by about $4.9 billion over the 6-year period. This averages out to roughly about $800 million annually. And then additionally, due to some increased debt capacity, MDOT is projecting in this year's financial forecast that there'll be about 1.1 billion in additional bonds issued over the 6-year forecast compared to what was projected last year. As you can see here, the largest of these revenue increases was increases to the vehicle registration fee enacted in 2024. And then were some large increases in the 2025 session. The capital gains surcharge, a portion of which is allocated to the TTF, and then certificate of title fee increases and the vehicle excise tax increases, among some other miscellaneous revenue increases. Turning now to the MDOT budget for fiscal 27 as a whole. In total, operating and capital is roughly about $7 billion. The operating portion is approximately $3.3 billion. This pie chart here breaks down the operating budget by MDOT mode. So the largest component, the Maryland Transit Administration, is just under $1.4 billion, or about 42% of the total, followed by the second largest component, WMATA, at just under $700 million, or 22%. So combined, those two pieces,
Good morning.
transit funding makes up about two-thirds of the total MDOT operating budget. Then this next slide is showing an overview of MDOT personnel. So the fiscal 27 budget supports approximately 9,500 regular and contractual positions across MDOT. The fiscal 27 proposed budget is a net increase of about 147 additional positions compared to fiscal 26. You can see here there's a large increase in the secretary's office and some decreases across the other modes. This is mainly due to a consolidation of IT-related positions. So there are some interdepartmental transfers from the different modes to the secretary's office. So that increase is not really new positions, it's more of just interdepartmental transfers. However, the largest amount of new positions in the budget is in MTA. There's a net increase of 104 positions in MTA. There's actually 139 new positions being added in MTA. However, due to some transfers out as part of that IT consolidation, that reduces that down to a net increase of about 104. The 139 new positions in MTA, the majority of those are new police positions and related positions for the Purple Line, in order to allow MTA to begin to recruit and train some of those positions in preparation for the opening of the Purple Line. So the next two slides go into the capital program for MDOT. The fiscal 26 to 2031 Consolidated Transportation Program, issued in January, totals about $22.1 billion in funding over the 6-year period. This is an increase of about $900 million in funding compared to last year's CTP. And this chart on this slide breaks down the changes by MDOT mode. The largest change is an increase of about 1.1 billion in the State Highway Administration. For transit, the 6-year capital funding for MTA and WMATA are roughly similar to what was projected in last year's CTP. MTA 6-year funding declines by about $17 million, and WMATA increases by about $10 million. The decrease in MTA is there's not really any one particular project that's accounting for that decline. It's more of just the aggregate of the cash flow needs for all of the projects in MTA. Just happened to be a decline this year. There were no all of the projects that were included in last year's CTP. There were no projects eliminated from this year's CTP. And in fact, there's actually one new project in MTA added. The preliminary development and evaluation for the fifth bus division within MTA has been added to this year's CTP. This next slide is showing an overview of the fiscal 27 capital budget. So you can see here, while the operating budget, the majority of that was supporting transit funding, the largest component of the capital budget is for the State Highway Administration at just under $1.2 billion, or about 31%. However, then the Maryland Transit Administration and capital support for Armada are the next two largest components of the capital program. I'm now going to turn to some specifics related to the Maryland Transit Administration, some budget highlights for MTA. The proposed fiscal 27 operating budget for MTA increases by about $71.1 million, or 5.4% compared to fiscal 26, to a total budget of about $1.4 billion. The largest component of that increase is $33.7 million for personnel expenses, which is largely related to the personnel changes that I mentioned earlier on the previous slide. There's also an increase of about $28.9 million for service contracts for the provision of transit services. These include contracts for mobility and paratransit, commuter bus service, as well as MARC train for the MARC track access and third-party operator contracts. These contract increases are due to a combination of inflation in the contract rates themselves, as well as reflecting some projected increase demand for transit services. For example, commuter bus service in prior years, there had been some reduction in frequency of some commuter bus service due to lower demand since the pandemic. However, MDOT has indicated that they're looking to restore some of those frequencies for commuter bus services based on demand, particularly as we've seen the federal government have some more return to work policies in the past year or so for federal employees commuting into the Washington, D.C. area. This slide shows a pie chart breaking down the proposed fiscal 27 operating budget for MTA. You can see here that a little over half of the operating budget supports the MTA bus operations. About a quarter supports rail operations, which includes the MARC train, light rail, Baltimore Metro, those types of transit services. And then the remaining roughly quarter of the budget supports the statewide program, which includes funding for locally operated transit systems and other statewide grants, and then the overall MTA administration. Then turning to the MTA capital program, this slide discusses some of the notable capital projects in fiscal 27. Overall, fiscal 27 capital funding is about $965.5 million. The five largest shares of the capital spending are shown here. The first, the purple line is by far the largest overall at about $241 million of the total capital budget. Construction on the purple line is ongoing. MDOT is estimating that as of the end of calendar 2025, construction was approximately 87% complete, and the current opening date is now projected at January 2028. The other large capital projects that are funded in 2027 include the MTA Light Rail Modernization Program, which has started preliminary procurement and design activities, Metro rail car and signal systems overhaul and replacement. There are currently a variety of improvements to the MTA Metro system, notably the replacement of MTA rail cars, of which the first entered service earlier this year. Those improvements are ongoing. The Frederick Douglass Tunnel project, which is led by Amtrak and includes some other federal funding sources through Amtrak. However, the MTA, the Maryland component of the construction funding, preliminary state funding begins for that in fiscal 2027. That project includes the replacement of the BNP tunnel under Baltimore City that's utilized by Amtrak and the MARC train. Um, and another component of that that's funded through state funds is the construction of a new West Baltimore MARC station, which will be in that same area of the track there. And then finally, the Red Line project. The Red Line project is still in the development and evaluation phase. There is $78.9 million in funding in the fiscal 27 budget for the Red Line. Funding is programmed for preliminary design and engineering activities. There was also funding for the Red Line preliminary design and engineering in the fiscal 26 and the fiscal 2025 budgets. I included a slide here on the MTA reorganization work group. This work group was established by Chapter 462 last session and met 5 times during the 2025 interim to look into and discuss the potential reorganization of the administration of transit services under MTA. Some key issues that the work group was tasked to look into were the oversight of Baltimore core transit services versus the oversight of MARC services and more statewide commuter-based services, and look into specifically how to focus oversight of transit services so that Baltimore City has adequate input into its local transit services. The work group submitted a report to the General Assembly in December 2025, in which it included its findings and recommendations. The work group in its report recommended that the establishment of 2 new services boards within MTA be established. These include a Baltimore Core Services Board to oversee Baltimore transit services, which would have some members appointed by Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County and Baltimore County, and then a commuter services advisory board to oversee the MARC train and some other commuter services modes within MTA. And the work group recommended that the division of MTA into separate agencies to oversee transit would not be in the best interest of the state, and that establishing new boards within the current structure of MTA would be more able to meet the goals of the state at this time. Basically, the work group looked into the volume of the contracts, federal funding agreements, collective bargaining agreements with labor unions, and the administrative effort that it would take to split MTA into 2 different agencies, and basically determined that the administrative efforts that would require would make that overly complex to approach the reorganization in that mode, which is what led to its recommendations in the December 2025 report. Then the last slide I have on here for MTA is just summarizing some of the other planning efforts and reports that MTA's issued in the last year. The Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan, a 5-year update, was released in November of 2025. This is kind of a broad planning report for improving transit services in Central Maryland over the next 25 years. The 10-year MTA Capital Needs Inventory and Prioritization Report. MTA releases a report every 3 years. They update the report, and the report covers the 10-year period for the MTA capital funding needs that are required over that period, including investments needed to reach and maintain a state of good repair in the MTA systems. The Be More Bus Plan was released in June of 2025, which includes a 10-year vision for improved MTA bus service in the Baltimore region. The MARC Growth and Transformation Plan was also released this summer, which includes a long-term vision for the expansion and increased frequency of MARC train service And the Customer Experience Action Plan was also released this summer, which includes a discussion of actions to be implemented over the next year to improve service reliability, communication accessibility, cleanliness, and safety system-wide within the MTA system. So that concludes the slides that I have. So I'll stop sharing. I can turn it over to Kelly.
Okay, let's see.
Thank you. Kelly, do you need to share or you're good just with it?
Uh,
You got it already?
I need to share. Just give me a moment and I should be able to find the screen. Let's see. Share that. Okay. Let me hit slideshow. Can you see the slideshow without the two screens or?
We're looking at two screens right now.
Okay. Let's see. Screen two. That should do it. That better?
There you go. That's
All
it. Thank
right. Thank you.
Good. Take it away.
Okay, so I'm just going to be covering mostly the WMATA budget in comparison. The WMATA proposed budget compares to Maryland's proposed budget for fiscal 2027. So here you can see the WMATA budget versus Maryland budget. WMATA is proposing $711 million for Maryland for operating, an additional $13 million compared to Maryland's proposed $698 million. And WMATA is also proposing $354 million for capital. If enacted, if WMATA's proposed budget is acted, there will be a budget amendment to match Maryland's budget to WMATA's. With the next slide, we have an overview of agency spending. You can see it for capital and operating. The capital budget is $2.1 billion, with Maryland contributing 16.6% with the proposed $354 million. And the operating budget is $2.7 billion, with 26% coming from Maryland through the proposed $711 million. Here we have operating revenues and the operating subsidies from the jurisdictions. This number is lower than the previous slide, 2.7. This one is 2.61 because it excludes the 120 million preventive maintenance transfer that goes to the capital budget. Operating revenues make up 25% with $651 million. And the remaining comes from the three jurisdictions. DC contributes the most at $746 million, and Maryland follows with $711 million. Here we have the operating expenses by category. The largest portion of the budget is personnel at over 70% of the expenses for the proposed fiscal 2027 budget from WMATA. This slide has the capital spending by category. Rail car related spending is the highest at $372 million, followed by bus facilities and paratransit at $340 million. However, if you combine the top four categories, over $1 billion would be spent on Metro Rail related activities in fiscal 2027. This slide goes over the current funding plan versus DMV moves. WMATA and the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments have endorsed the DMV moves task force plan. This plan calls for an additional $460 million from the three jurisdictions beginning in fiscal 2029. We have a side-by-side breakdown of the current funding plan compared to the DMV moves plan. The current plan is programmed at $13.5 billion from 2027 to 2032, and the DMV moves plan is $18.3 billion, an additional $4.8 billion. The final slide has the investment scenario by mode for the current funding and DMV moves funding. This slide is totals different from the previous slides because it excludes the debt service and revenue loss from capital projects. So you can see the DMV moves plans would invest an additional $3.2 billion in rail and over $830 million into the bus system. And that's my presentation for WMATA. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both. We'll move to questions, and it looks like Chair Corman will start us off.
I think you're the chair in this case, Madam Chair, but thank you. a few questions, if I may. So first, Sam, just want to thank you for the work on the work group that you went over. You were obviously very helpful in getting that report together, and of course, there's a bill to implement exactly what you helped put together. On the titling taxes, that's just the excise taxes, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of confusing. It's basically just the excise tax, and then um I guess I'm not sure if they consider the like the certificate of title tax, if that goes into that as well, or if that's goes under the MVA fee category, but
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but it might actually be good to know given that that is now such a large component so that we actually have an understanding of what it is. It was always very
yeah.
simple to know what the motor fuel tax was.
Oh, sorry. There is also the rental vehicle excise tax. That's also included in the titling tax number as well.
Yeah, I think it's just those two excise taxes, but I'm just not sure. And again, it would just be good to know because it is such a big component now.
Okay.
Um, my second question for you, and then I have one for Kelly, and then I'll cede to Chair Palakvich-Carr, is there anything worth noting on the locally operated transit system, the lots funding this year, or is it kind of steady state?
Um, it's there's a slight increase due to there is a small mandate for elderly and handicapped transportation services that's required to increase by the CPI percentage rate each year. So there's a small increase in lots funding. I think it's about 101 to $200,000 there. Otherwise, I think the rest of it is pretty much stable, same level as last year.
Great, thank you. And then for Kelly, you highlighted the difference between WMATA's projection of Maryland's contribution and Maryland's projection. There's always a little bit of a difference, and we wrap our budget before they wrap theirs, so there's always like a little bit of a true up. But do you know what's driving the difference that you highlighted now? Like, what are they currently? What's the difference?
I have to get back to you to see exactly how WMATA came to the 7-Eleven. I know it's usually looking at the budget is a breakdown of how much they save from PG, how much from Montgomery. We needed to break down for Maryland, so I had to see what their breakdown is, as opposed to Maryland just gives a total.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Delia Palakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and my apologies, colleagues, for being off camera this morning. My question is for Mr. Quist. I think it was maybe your third or fourth slide. You gave the summary of all of the revenue actions that we took over the last two sessions. And what I'm curious about is do we have at this point a summary of like what we anticipated those revenue changes would be versus what they actually are? Like, are we bringing in what we thought that we would, or do you have any sense of that order of magnitude at this point?
Yes, we can, I guess I don't have that in front of me right now, but we have the initial projections that were in place at the end of last session for the revenue increases that were enacted. Um, so we could compare the projections on the slide that I shared today were MDOT's current projections from this January. So we could compare those to what they had last session. Just off the top of my head, I don't believe there was that substantial of a difference. I think there's a little bit of variation in a few areas just from revenue. I don't know, revenues ending up slightly different than what was projected, but um, I think roughly um, the total number was roughly similar, but I can double check that and get back to you on that.
Thank you. No, that's helpful for today. And yeah, if there's any follow-up, I think that would be helpful to know too. Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Okay, thank you. Couple of follow-up pieces. Are there any other questions for our presenters today? All right, since we have people who follow transit issues so closely, any other points that anyone wants to make that aren't questions? Okay, well, that wraps us up then for our first briefing. Be sure to tell all your friends how good this briefing was so that people join us for the next one. Sam and Kelly, really appreciate you taking the time to put the presentation together and to join us this morning. And folks will get an announcement in your email tomorrow with the specifics of the next two briefings. And hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.
Thank you.